Welcome back, fellow students of philosophy, all you seekers of hidden histories out there. I am so thrilled to finally open the vault for you today. In this explainer, I'm going to be stepping into the role of your scholarly archivist, and we are dusting off a truly profound, endlessly fascinating mythic text called the Concord of 72 Lanterns. We're going to explore a deeply layered historical allegory here, one that's all about humanity confronting its own shadow self. Because look, we aren't just reading a standard dark fantasy chronicle today. We are unpacking a highly sophisticated psychological map that just happens to be dressed up in mythic armor. So get comfortable, open your minds, and let's examine how a world that has finally been physically healed must then turn inward to face the demons of its very own conscience.
Okay, let's just quickly glance at how this grimoire is structured. Honestly, it reads less like a traditional fantasy epic and way more like a masterclass in human psychology. We'll be moving from the external physical restoration of the world right into the internal, grueling healing of the human conscience. First, we'll look beyond the natural masters. Then we'll define the crowns of the shadow self, before meeting the angels of the deep psyche. After that, we're going to explore this amazing concept called the power of proportion, and finally, wrap things up with small axe and cracked bells.
All right, Section 1. Beyond the Natural Masters.
So, to truly set the stage for this archetypal study, we have to understand exactly what this mythic world looks like after the environment itself has been completely healed. It's a really interesting starting point. Our text opens right in the aftermath of this massive ecological victory. Aurelion Meridian and the Natural Masters have literally healed the earth. They've bound the wild currents of natural power, the storms, the deep roots, the beasts, the seasons, all into one perfectly living circle. But then the text draws our attention to this really chilling silence that follows. The fields are fertile again. The rivers are crystal clean. But as the old exorcist scribes quickly start to realize, a perfectly healed landscape doesn't do a thing to fix a corrupted human will. The physical world is completely at peace. But then, on the 8th night, every single untouched bell in the world just begins to ring. The true war hasn't ended at all. It's actually just retreated into the minds of the people. And I think this brilliantly illustrates the major philosophical shift happening in our text. While the masters of natural power were out there manipulating physical reality to fix, say, a drought or poison in the soil, the Concord of 72 Lanterns represents a monumental shift into the incredibly dangerous, unpredictable terrain of internal psychological reality. We're moving from fixing nature to healing memory, truth, and proportion. Because, as Aurelion himself points out in a pretty devastating line, a river can run perfectly clean while the city right beside it still sells its children into the mines. Healing the earth was just step 1.
Moving on to Section 2. Crowns of the Shadow Self.
This brings us right to the core conflict of our archetypal study. The emergence of what the text refers to as the demonic crowns. Now, here is the absolutely crucial point. If we're going to understand this, we have to completely discard our traditional pop culture notions of demons, right? These are not literal monsters flying around in the sky with pitchforks. Not at all. A demonic crown is actually a psychological manifestation of a specific human character flaw. It's described as a spirit that confuses power with permission, and functionally, it acts as the ultimate ego defense mechanism. These crowns are literal personifications of our deepest, most unhealed wounds. They are our rage. They are our vanity, our despair. They are, quite literally, the lies we tell ourselves every day to justify our absolute ugliest behaviors.
And the way the text describes where they hide is just fascinating. It says, these crowns float over cities and bloodlines, sure, but much more terrifyingly, they hide inside the very fabric of normal human interaction. You'll find them hiding inside promises, inside marriages, courtrooms, temples, and even our own memories. Imagine a crown of false prophecy that slowly leads an entire village astray, or a crown of greedy counsel that somehow convinces a merchant to weigh his daily bread against human tears. They have retreated to the one place, the absolute only place, where all that grand nature magic cannot reach them, the human will.
Now, if you are a student of philosophy or psychology, I highly invite you to use this ancient taxonomy as a bit of a mental worksheet for yourself. Really look at this. Map your own virtues and your own shadows against these ancient mythic archetypes. Are you perhaps projecting guilt as anger, much like those suffering under the crown of rage? Or maybe you're hiding behind a beautiful falsehood to mask vanity. These archetypes you see here, Seraphiel, Avariel, the thrones, Araphan, they represent the highly specific holy interventions needed to resolve these very specific human shadow states. It is a remarkably precise, almost clinical psychological framework when you really dig into it.
Let's move to Section 3, Angels of the Deep Psyche. Let's look a little closer at how these specific angelic entities operate, because they don't act like typical warriors swinging swords around. They act as highly specialized psychological mechanisms designed to dismantle our ego defenses. Let's contrast two of these incredible forces. First up, we have Seraphiel of the First Dawn. Seraphiel approaches the city of Orveth, right? A city completely consumed by the crown of rage. Now, Seraphiel doesn't attack the angry mob. Instead, he uses memories. He shows them a mother nursing a brother or a child's sudden laughter. He uses these memories to widen a world that has been violently, artificially narrowed by rage. Because rage only survives by making your world incredibly small, doesn't it? Seraphiel defeats it by expanding their humanity. Now contrast that with Avariel, the cherub of uncovered truth, who's facing down the crown of beautiful falsehood. She doesn't dramatically smash the enchanted glass masking these corrupt nobles. She literally just asks for a mirror and makes it honest. She cracks their crown not through loud accusations, but through the terrifying, completely quiet exposure of their true inner selves.
You really have to notice the profound moral lesson that's being mapped out in these steps. The angels of this grimoire do not dominate the demons. They don't just overpower them, because think about it, that would just be replacing one kind of tyranny with another. Instead, they follow these distinct, almost therapeutic psychological steps. First, they accurately name the exact illusion the human is hiding behind. Second, they gently expose the inner, hidden wound that illusion was desperately trying to protect. And third, and this is the most important part, they return the burden of choice back to the human. They literally just return the humans to themselves. Let's see how this builds as we look at our next entities. So, the 7 thrones descend upon the Valley of Law. This is a place totally infected by what the text calls cruel order. The thrones don't judge the people based on their written legalities. Nope, they weigh the invisible human costs against this cruel order, literally shattering prisons that were built for nothing more than human pride. Meanwhile, we have Oriphan standing at the adamant gate, facing down an entire army driven by the crown of conquest. And how does Oriphan shatter this mighty warrior duke's conquest? Not with superior magical force. He does it by showing the duke a reflection of his own inner, deeply frightened child, the little boy who once begged the world to never ever make him feel helpless again. Conquest, the text brilliantly notes, simply cannot survive compassion for the self it tried to bury. I really want us to stop and reflect on the profound nature of this specific quote from Oriphan. Heaven often begins by stopping one man. It is such a striking reminder for any student of history or philosophy. True psychological victory, true systemic change in the world is always deeply personal and internal long before it ever manifests to affect the external world. You literally cannot stop an army of cruelty until you first stop the terrified little boy operating the levers of the general's mind.
And then we have Lumail, the radiant physician bringing the healing rain to the plague city of Mavrin. Now, the demon crown here didn't actually create the physical disease. What it created was despair. It made the sick deeply ashamed of needing help, and it made the healthy absolutely terrified to offer it. Lumail intervention here is so moving. The text explicitly points out that the true miracle wasn't the sudden magical erasure of death or disease. The actual miracle was the sudden vanishing of abandonment and shame. Healing started out as medicine, sure, but it ultimately became community.
All right, moving into Section 4, the power of proportion.
As this massive conflict deepens, the grimoire shifts to a truly fascinating archetypal concept. What exactly happens when these individual shadows unionize, when they join forces? Well, here we see Damiel of the Measured Hand arriving at the Obsidian Cathedral. And the demonic crowns have actually learned from their individual defeats. They've woven their powers together into this massive, unified diadem of shadow. Pride is crowning rage, rage is defending deception, deception is excusing cruelty. It's like the ultimate ideological complex. And how does Damiel face this? Not with a giant sword. He uses only the power of geometry, accurate proportion, and language.
I mean, just listen to these corrupted definitions the text gives us. Lust called itself love. Greed called itself provision. Cowardice called itself prudence. Control called itself protection. Vanity called itself excellence. And vengeance called itself justice. The ultimate defense mechanism of the human shadow is taking a profound, ugly flaw and calling it by a virtuous name. It is self-deception at its absolute most insidious. So Damiel looks at this massive, unified diadem of rebranded sins, and he simply names it one word: confusion.
And this brings us to the core philosophy of the Measured Hand, which is just elegantly captured right here. Evil grows by exaggeration, light begins by saying, "This is what you are, and no more." By calmly naming each falsehood and returning it to its rightful, pathetic little size, that massive diadem just shrinks back into separate, totally manageable crowns. You see, returning a shadow to its accurate, rightful proportion strips it of its mythic, overwhelming power over our lives. It's honestly an incredible lesson in cognitive behavioral therapy written centuries before that term even existed. Finally, Section 5, Small Acts and Cracked Bells. Towards the end, our archival text brings us all the way down from the grand cosmic scales of the Obsidian Cathedral right down into the ordinary, dusty streets of human daily life. This is Civril, the angel of the common gate. Notice his cloak isn't made of armor. It's woven from 1,000 tiny, small human acts. We're talking repaired shoes, shared bowls of soup, honest waits at the market, minor debts forgiven. And the text notes something so cool here. Demons fear Civril way more than they fear the great warriors. Why? Because grand evil prefers grand stages. It is utterly frustrated and starved by daily, inconvenient, boring goodness, because that kind of goodness gives it no single throat to cut. It is such a powerful reminder that civic decay is fought not with grand sweeping declarations, but with 1,000 small corrected scales and gentle answers every single day.
And then we are introduced to the absolute smallest of the hosts, the Guardian Lanterns. These aren't assigned to kingdoms, they are assigned to individuals. We actually follow a boy named Ren, who, by the way, was the kid who threw the first stone in the City of Rage, and we follow his guardian lantern, Eerie. What's amazing is that Eerie never argues with Ren about his guilt. It simply shows him his tasks: carry water for the elders, sit quietly with the grieving, learn the actual names of the people you hurt. The focus shifts entirely to the intimate, personal accountability of doing the daily, unglamorous work of repair. It's about doing the work rather than sitting around paralyzed, waiting for some grand, unearned redemption to wash over you. Which brings us to the real climax of the explainer today. At the final battle, all the grandest crowns fall to the archangels, but one stubbornly remains, the silent, black, plain crown of despair. It threatens everything simply by existing and whispering, "Even if light wins today, darkness returns tomorrow, so why continue?" It is the ultimate nihilistic shadow, and guess who steps up to meet it? Not the grand archangels. It is met by a little Eerie who is carrying a single human memory. It's the memory of Ren, years later, stubbornly refusing to melt down a bell that had cracked during the violent days of rage.
When Ren is asked why on earth he keeps that useless cracked bell, he gives an answer that just hits right in the chest. He says, "Because a cracked bell can still warn the city, and because some things should remember what they survived." It is this single, grounded, stubbornly hopeful human memory that Irie touches to the crown of despair. It's this profound acceptance of our flawed, cracked nature and our fierce willingness to still be of use despite our damage that ultimately shatters the absolute power of despair. It is just a breathtaking resolution to our entire archetypal journey.
The text finally ends with the covenant of the unfallen light, which makes a huge revelation. The angels do not stay behind to act as our rulers. Humanity is not spared the burden of choosing. Instead, it is honored with the strength to choose again. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave all my fellow philosophy students and viewers with a provocative thought to chew on as you go about your own personal shadow work. If the angels only challenge the crowns and the earth only receives the wounded, are you willing to carry the burden of choosing the light today? Thank you so much for exploring the archives with me today. Keep examining those inner crowns, and I'll see you next time.